Hi guys, my name is Vanessa Smedley and I'm a painter. Today we are going to paint this pumpkin scene right here because what says fall more than pumpkins? And your pumpkin spice lattes, and your pumpkin tea, and your pumpkin cookies, and your pumpkin bread, and your pumpkin Pop-Tarts, and your pumpkin trash bags, and your pumpkin toilet paper? Anyways, let's do this! And here's the materials for the week. Feel free to screenshot or pause. Start out my mixing today by mixing a nice orange with cadmium-free red and cadmium-free yellow. And then I mix cadmium-free red, cadmium-free yellow, and add just a little bit of burnt sienna. Then I prepare a pool of yellow ochre by itself, burnt sienna by itself, and then I mix lemon yellow and ultramarine blue for a nice dirty green. Then I mix lemon yellow, phthalo blue, and add a touch of Alizarin Crimson to subdue the color just a little bit. And then I mix Indigo Blue and Cadmium Yellow to make a nice, dark, subdued blue-green for the background. For the background of still lifes like this, I like them to be nice and blurry to keep the focus on the subject, so I'm wetting the background to do this wet on wet. And this one I can just paint around the main subject because it's not that complex. Then I begin dropping in the color. I start with my lighter green and then I drop in that darker green, making sure to make it nice and dark next to the pumpkin so that it'll stand out. Then I drop in some nice dark consistency Payne's gray to make it even darker. Then I drop in a little bit of burnt umber for some variation and then give it a spray to keep the wash moving. There is a lot of pooling water on this, so I take a shop towel and dab that up a little bit because I don't want all that water to cause some back runs. Then I decide to use some masking fluid to preserve some of these blades of grass. Just make sure to use a cheap brush and dip it in liquid dish detergent first. Then I decide to work on my pumpkin first, so I wet the area with my number 12 round brush. Then I begin to drop in some color, and I start with that most pure version of my orange, drop in some cadmium yellow in the highlight area, and then fill in the rest with that same orange. Then I begin to add some of that dirtier orange to the shadow side, and adding in those demarcations between the little, gosh, I don't even know what you call those things, sections? And here I'm darkening up the shadow area with some nice burnt umber. I'm just continuing to use a thicker consistency of burnt umber to darken the shadows here because that's what's going to give this pumpkin three-dimensional form. Here I'm using a damp brush with clean water to lift some highlights off on the side. And here I'm lifting some more highlights on the light side of the pumpkin. And I'm currently resisting making Star Wars reference between light side and the dark side. Oh, oops, I guess I already made one. And here I'm adding a little bit of variation in color by adding some burnt sienna. And continuing to lift out some lights. And then I continue to add more burnt umber to the dark side because you don't know the power of never mind. And it's time to take a break and let this dry completely. And I have mixed up a very watery consistency of burnt umber and Payne's gray, and I am dropping that on the corn husk here. And then I mix in a little bit more Payne's gray for the shadow area. And then I lift out some highlights with a damp brush. And then I mix a much darker version of the Payne's gray and burnt umber mix, and I use it on the stem here. Then I lift out some highlights, and then I add in some Payne's gray for the darker parts of it. Then I use a 1/2 inch flat brush to lift out some more highlights, and then drop in just a little bit of burnt sienna for some variation. It's time to begin working on the ear of corn, so I wet that entire area first and drop in some Naples Yellow. And then I use yellow ochre for a little bit of a shadow color. Then I begin dropping in my dirty green color and orange and burnt sienna and all of these colors just to make this interesting kind of corn. I wish I could tell you what kind of corn it is, but I really don't know. As you can see, I'm really just suggesting all these different kernels here. You really don't want to paint each kernel. That's overkill. Once you're done with that, you need to let it dry. And I come back with a very watery mix of burnt umber and Payne's gray and add a little bit of detail to the top of that stem. I'm just adding in some burnt umber for some shadows, and then I'm going to blend the edges of that with clean water to blend it into the dry layer below. Just continuing to add and blend, add and blend. The shadow is still not dark enough for me, so I'm just adding some more Payne's gray to the bottom of this and getting it really nice and dark. In a previous video, I've mentioned that really dark shadows is what really makes something three-dimensional. If you want to see that video, the link is above. But that's what I'm continuing to do here. I'm just continuing to darken and darken just to make it more and more three-dimensional. Now that the ear of corn is completely dried, I'm going back in and I'm adding some more of these colors to add some more detail. You still don't want to paint every single kernel. You're just making a suggestion of all of them. Then I use a mix of Payne's gray and burnt umber and add in some demarcations between the rows of the kernels. And then even deeper shadow with really dark Payne's gray. And I mix up a little bit darker of a version of Payne's gray and burnt umber for the shadow areas of this husk, or husk if you're from Ireland, which reminds me of a really funny scene from the IT crowd, but I will leave that. Also, sorry for butchering that accent, but anyway. I'm continuing with more details, and I'm just adding in a suggestion of some of those wrinkles that are in the husk. And oops, I left out some of the background green here. And here I'm just lifting out some additional highlights with a damp brush. I made this highlight on the side a little bit big, so I'm adding in a little bit more of that orange and then blending it in with clean water. I'm removing the masking fluid with a rubber cement eraser, and then I begin to fill in those blades with that lighter green, which turned out to be far more difficult than I even thought about, to get your stroke just perfect on like that. But I wanted to make sure and keep the green nice and clean, so I mean, it turned out okay. And then I sweep all that lighter green in the whole area and then begin to drop in the darker green in the shadowy areas. I poke fun at people sometimes for their pumpkin spice obsessions, but I must confess, I did make some pumpkin bread yesterday and it was amazing. And then add some Payne's Gray for the really dark shadow areas. Here I'm using the side of a store card that I've cut in half and I'm scraping in some highlights on this grass. Also using it to drag some of that paint up to make some more blades of grass. I made a video showing you exactly how to do that. If you'd like to watch that, link above. I've let all that dry and now I'm going to come back in and do this shadow on the side of the corn. I'm really just layering Payne's Gray over the top of it at this point. And then again, I'm just darkening that shadow. Everywhere I can get it darker, I'm getting it darker. With my number 6 round brush, I'm just adding some of that dark green in there and using negative painting, which means I'm painting in between the blades of grass rather than painting in the blades of grass themselves. Now I have let all of that dry and I'm coming back in with a white soft pastel and adding a little bit of shine to the pumpkin and a little bit of highlight to certain areas. Now I'm using a light green pastel pencil and I'm adding in some more blades of grass. Then I take an orange pastel pencil and I'm adding in a little bit of detail here and there. Then I use yellow and white to add a little bit of detail into the corn. And here's the completed painting, all dried and signed and ready to go. And there you have it, a nice, lovely little pumpkin that you can add to your pumpkin spice collection. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share. Please leave a comment. I would love to hear your feedback. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.